The silence in the basement was deafening. Marcus Williams sat tied to a chair, sweat dripping down his face as Bumpy Johnson slowly circled him like a predator. The leather briefcase that once held $100,000 lay empty on the concrete floor. The money was gone. The trust was broken. And Marcus knew he was living on borrowed time. "You thought you could steal from me and just disappear into the night?" Bumpy's voice was calm, almost gentle. That's what made it terrifying. To understand what happened that night in 1962, you need to go back 3 months earlier. Back when Marcus Williams was the most trusted man in Harlem's underworld. Back when Bumpy Johnson called him family. Marcus wasn't just Bumpy's accountant. He was the keeper of secrets, the guardian of numbers that could topple empires or build them. For 7 years, he had managed every dollar that flowed through Bumpy's operations. Policy numbers, protection money, investment returns. Marcus knew where every penny came from and where it went, and Bumpy trusted him with his life. But trust in Harlem was a fragile thing. One mistake could shatter it forever. It started with a woman. It always did. Elena Rodriguez had walked into Marcus's office on a Tuesday afternoon, claiming she needed help with her late husband's debts. She was beautiful, desperate, and everything Marcus had never allowed himself to want. She spoke of dreams beyond the numbers, of a life where they could disappear together to Mexico and start fresh. "All we need is enough money to run," she whispered in his ear one night. "Just enough to be free." Marcus had always been careful, meticulous, but love made him reckless. He started skimming. Small amounts at first. 50 here, 100 there, money that wouldn't be missed from the larger operations, but 50 became 500, 500 became 5,000, and 5,000 became the kind of number that even Bumpy Johnson would notice. The plan was simple. Take the 100,000 from the weekly collection, blame it on a robbery, meet Elena at Grand Central Station, catch the midnight train to Mexico City, start over. But Marcus had made one fatal error. He had underestimated the man who had survived every betrayal, every attempt on his life, every scheme to bring him down. Bumpy Johnson didn't become the king of Harlem by trusting anyone completely, not even family. That Tuesday night, as Marcus prepared to execute his plan, Bumpy was already 3 steps ahead. He had been watching, waiting, learning. The legendary street philosopher who could read men's souls like books had spotted the signs weeks ago. The nervous glances, the late nights, the subtle changes in Marcus's routine. Bumpy had survived prison, rival gangs, and federal investigations. He had built an empire on the principle that loyalty was everything, and betrayal was a death sentence. But this betrayal cut deeper than the others. This was personal. As Marcus sat in that basement, Bumpy pulled out a photograph. Elena Rodriguez. But she wasn't the desperate widow Marcus believed her to be. She was something else entirely. "Did she tell you she loved you, Marcus?" Bumpy asked, his voice still eerily calm. "Did she promise you a future?" Marcus's eyes widened as the truth began to dawn on him. But the real shock was yet to come. What Marcus discovered next would prove that in Bumpy Johnson's world, every betrayal had consequences, and every consequence had been planned from the very beginning. Elena Rodriguez wasn't who Marcus thought she was. She was Bumpy's niece. And everything that had happened over the past 3 months had been orchestrated from the very beginning. "You see, Marcus," Bumpy continued, setting the photograph on the table between them. "Elena came to me 6 months ago. Said she was tired of seeing good men fall for bad women. Said she wanted to help me test the loyalty of those closest to me." Marcus felt his world crumbling. The woman he loved. The woman he had betrayed everything for. She had been working for Bumpy all along. "But here's what's interesting," Bumpy said, his voice carrying that dangerous calm that made grown men confess their sins. "Elena didn't just seduce you. She made you believe you were the one in control. She made you think stealing from me was your idea." The rope around Marcus's wrists felt tighter now. Not because Bumpy's men had adjusted them, but because the weight of his betrayal was crushing him from the inside. Bumpy walked to the corner of the basement and returned with a ledger. Marcus's ledger. The one he thought he had destroyed before attempting his escape. 7 years, Marcus. 7 years of perfect books. Every number in place. Every transaction accounted for. You were better than perfect. You were family. Bumpy opened the ledger to a specific page. Until 3 months ago. Marcus stared at the numbers. His careful forgeries. His desperate attempts to cover the missing money. All of it laid bare in black and white. You thought you were clever, Bumpy continued. Moving money between accounts. Creating phantom expenses. Making it look like the losses came from legitimate business costs. But you forgot something important. Bumpy's finger traced down the column of numbers. I might not have your education, Marcus, but I built this empire by knowing every dollar that comes in and every dollar that goes out. You can disguise theft, but you can't hide it. Not from me. The room fell silent except for the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Marcus had always known this moment might come. In the back of his mind, he had prepared for it. But he had never imagined it would feel like this, like a father discovering his son's betrayal. The $100,000, Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Where is it? Bumpy smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was almost sad. That's the beautiful thing about this whole situation, Marcus. There never was $100,000. Marcus's eyes widened in confusion. You see, I knew about your little romance with Elena 3 weeks into your courtship. I knew about your plans 2 weeks before you tried to execute them. So I did what any smart businessman would do. I prepared. Bumpy pulled out a second photograph. This one showed Marcus at Grand Central Station waiting with 2 suitcases. Alone. Elena never came to meet you, did she? You waited for 2 hours. 2 hours with suitcases full of newspaper clippings and fake money. 2 hours wondering if the love of your life had betrayed you. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. The woman he loved had never intended to run away with him. The money he had stolen had been replaced with worthless paper before he had even taken it. And Bumpy had watched it all happen. But that's not the most interesting part of this story, Bumpy said, returning the photographs to his jacket pocket. The most interesting part is what happened while you were standing on that platform, realizing you had been played. Bumpy moved closer, his presence filling the small space between them. Because while you were discovering that Elena had vanished into thin air, my men were discovering something else, something that makes your little theft look like pocket change. Marcus felt a chill run through his body. There was something in Bumpy's voice, something that suggested this story was far from over. Someone else has been stealing from me, Marcus. Someone who used your romance and your desperation as a cover for something much bigger. Someone who wanted me to focus on your small betrayal while they executed their own plan. Bumpy's voice dropped to almost a whisper. And that someone made one crucial mistake. They assumed I would kill you immediately when I discovered your theft. They assumed I would be too angry to ask the right questions. The basement door opened, and footsteps echoed down the stairs. Someone was coming. Someone Marcus hadn't expected to see ever again. The footsteps coming down the basement stairs belonged to Detective Ray Sullivan, the same cop who had been investigating Bumpy's operations for 3 years, the same man who had sworn to bring down the Harlem Kingpin, and the same person Marcus had been secretly feeding information to for the past 6 months. Hello, Marcus, Detective Sullivan said, his voice echoing in the concrete chamber. Looks like your retirement plan didn't work out the way you expected. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice, not because Sullivan was there, but because of the way Bumpy was smiling at both of them. You see, Marcus, Bumpy continued, while you were busy planning your little escape with Elena, Detective Sullivan here was planning something much more ambitious. He wasn't just trying to arrest me, he was trying to replace me. Sullivan's hand moved toward his weapon, but Bumpy raised a finger, a simple gesture that froze the detective in place. Now, Ray. No need for dramatics. We're all friends here. After all, you've been working for me longer than Marcus has been stealing from me. The revelation hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. The detective he had been feeding information to, the man he thought was going to help him bring down Bumpy Johnson, was corrupt. But that wasn't the worst part. You want to know the real genius of this operation? Bumpy asked, circling both men now. Ray here convinced you that feeding him information was the right thing to do. Made you feel like a hero, like you were helping justice prevail. But every piece of information you gave him, he gave to me. Marcus's world collapsed completely. His theft, his betrayal, his cooperation with law enforcement. All of it had been orchestrated, all of it had been known. But Detective Sullivan got greedy, Bumpy continued. He started thinking he could use the information you provided to build cases against my competitors, clear the field, become the new power in Harlem, with a badge for protection and Marcus Williams as his financial wizard. Sullivan finally spoke, his voice steady despite the circumstances. You can't prove any of this, Johnson, and you can't hold a police detective without consequences. Bumpy laughed, a genuine laugh that filled the basement. Ray, you still don't understand the game, do you? I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to hold you. Because in about 30 minutes, Internal Affairs is going to receive a very interesting package. Bumpy pulled out a manila envelope from behind some boxes. Bank statements showing deposits into your account, photographs of you meeting with known criminals, audio recordings of you discussing evidence manipulation, and best of all, a detailed confession written in Marcus's handwriting, explaining how you recruited him to help you take over my operations. Marcus stared at the envelope. I never wrote any confession. Of course you did, Bumpy replied. 7 years of managing my books means I have samples of your handwriting going back to the beginning. Amazing what a skilled forger can do with enough practice material. The detective's composure was cracking. This is insane. You're framing both of us. I'm not framing anyone, Bumpy said calmly. I'm revealing the truth. You are corrupt. Marcus did steal from me. You did try to use him to bring me down. The only thing I'm adding is the narrative that ties it all together. Bumpy walked over to a table Marcus hadn't noticed before. On it sat a tape recorder. You see, gentlemen, while you were both busy plotting against me, I was recording everything. Every meeting, every phone call, every whispered conversation in dark corners. The beauty of being underestimated is that people forget you're always listening. He pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the basement. His own words discussing stolen money. His own voice agreeing to provide information to Sullivan. His own voice planning Bumpy's downfall. The tape is real, Bumpy said. Your voices are real. Your crimes are real. The only creative license I'm taking is suggesting that you were working together from the beginning, instead of being manipulated separately. Sullivan drew his weapon. I'm not going down for this. But before he could raise it completely, 2 of Bumpy's men emerged from the shadows. They had been there the entire time, waiting, watching, ready. Now here's where things get interesting, Bumpy said as his men disarmed the detective. Because this story isn't really about stolen money or corrupt cops. This story is about respect, and what happens when people forget who they're dealing with. Bumpy approached both men, his presence filling the space between them. Marcus, you stole from me because you thought I wouldn't notice. Ray, you tried to manipulate me because you thought I couldn't outthink a college-educated detective. Both of you made the same fatal mistake. The basement fell silent except for the sound of their breathing. You thought being smarter than Bumpy Johnson was the same thing as being wiser than him. But what neither Marcus nor Detective Sullivan realized was that their betrayal was about to serve a purpose neither of them could have imagined. Because Bumpy Johnson was about to use their downfall to send a message that would echo through the streets of Harlem for decades. Bumpy Johnson walked to the center of the basement, his movements deliberate and calculated. In his hand, he held a small device that would change everything, not a weapon, not money, not something far more powerful in 1962 Harlem, a telephone. You know what the difference is between smart men and wise men? Bumpy asked, dialing a number from memory. Smart men make plans. Wise men make sure their plans serve multiple purposes. The phone rang once before someone answered. Commissioner Murphy, this is Ellsworth Johnson. I believe you've been looking for evidence of police corruption in your department. I have something that might interest you. Detective Sullivan's face went white. Marcus felt his stomach drop. They were listening to Bumpy Johnson call the police commissioner directly. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that the commissioner seemed to be expecting the call. "Yes, sir. Both men are here. Detective Ray Sullivan and Marcus Williams. The evidence package should be arriving at your office within the hour. Audio recordings, financial documents, and a complete timeline of their conspiracy." Bumpy hung up and turned back to his captives with that same calm expression. "You see, gentlemen, while you were both busy trying to outsmart me, I was building something much bigger, a relationship with the very people you thought would protect you or prosecute me." Sullivan found his voice. "Commissioner Murphy would never work with you. He's been trying to clean up this department for years." "Exactly," Bumpy replied. "And what better way to clean up the NYPD than to hand him corrupt cops on a silver platter, with evidence so overwhelming that even the newspapers would have to admit the department is better off without them?" The basement door opened again. This time it was Elena Rodriguez, the woman Marcus thought he loved, the woman who had destroyed his life. But she wasn't alone. Behind her walked FBI agent Patricia Hayes, a federal investigator who had been working organized crime cases for a decade. And behind her, two men in expensive suits who Marcus didn't recognize. "Marcus," Elena said, her voice now carrying none of the warmth he remembered. "I want you to meet some people. This is Agent Hayes from the FBI, and these gentlemen represent certain interests in Chicago and New York who have been very concerned about Detective Sullivan's activities." Marcus stared in disbelief. The FBI was here. Representatives from other crime families were here, and they were all working with Bumpy Johnson. "You see," Agent Hayes spoke for the first time, "Detective Sullivan's corruption wasn't just local. He had been selling information to competing organizations in other cities. Information that could have started a war between families. Information that could have brought federal attention to activities that were better left unnoticed." One of the men in suits stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson contacted us 6 months ago. Said he had discovered a rogue police officer who was playing all sides against each other. Said he wanted to handle it in a way that would benefit everyone involved." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about Marcus's theft. This wasn't just about Sullivan's corruption. This was about Bumpy Johnson positioning himself as a peacemaker, a problem solver, a man who could be trusted by law enforcement and criminal organizations alike. "But the most beautiful part of this whole operation," Bumpy said, "is what happens next." He walked over to Marcus and cut the ropes binding his hands. "Marcus, you're going to walk out of here tonight. You're going to disappear from New York. You're going to start a new life somewhere far away. And you're never going to speak about what happened here." Marcus rubbed his wrists, confused. "You're letting me go?" "I'm giving you a gift," Bumpy replied. "The gift of understanding that some lessons are worth more than revenge. You stole from me because you thought you were smarter than me. Tonight you learned that intelligence without wisdom is just educated stupidity." Detective Sullivan started to speak, but Agent Hayes held up her hand. "Detective Sullivan will be arrested tomorrow morning on federal charges of corruption, conspiracy, and racketeering. He'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison. His career, his reputation, and his freedom are over." Bumpy walked back to the center of the room. "But here's the real lesson, gentlemen. Marcus thought he was stealing money. Ray thought he was building power. Both of you thought you were playing the game, but neither of you understood something fundamental." He paused, letting the silence build tension. "I don't just play the game. I am the game. Every move you made, every plan you hatched, every betrayal you attempted, it all served my purposes. You weren't my enemies. You were my pawns." Elena stepped forward. "The $100,000 Marcus tried to steal? It was bait. The information he fed to Sullivan? It was disinformation. The corruption investigation? It was orchestrated to remove Sullivan and 3 other dirty cops who were becoming problems." Marcus felt the weight of his complete manipulation settling over him. "How long have you been planning this?" 2 years, Bumpy replied. "Since the first time I noticed irregularities in the books. Since the first time Sullivan tried to pressure one of my associates. I knew eventually you would both make your moves. I just made sure that when you did, those moves would serve my interests." Agent Hayes opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file. "Detective Sullivan's arrest will be front-page news tomorrow. Corrupt cop brought down by anonymous tip. The story will make the NYPD look competent, the FBI look effective, and certain community leaders look like responsible citizens who care about justice. The basement fell silent as the full scope of Bumpy Johnson's chess game became clear. But there was still one more move to make. One final lesson that would echo through the streets of Harlem for generations, and it would require both mercy and brutality in equal measure. 6 months later, Detective Ray Sullivan was found dead in his federal prison cell. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, everyone knew that certain debts had been collected. The streets had their own justice system, and Sullivan had violated every code that mattered. His death made headlines for exactly 1 day. Then the city moved on. Because in New York, corrupt cops died and honest ones took their place. The wheel kept turning. Marcus Williams disappeared completely. Some say he moved to Mexico and opened a small accounting firm. Others claim he joined a monastery in California, seeking redemption through silence and prayer. But those who knew Bumpy Johnson understood the truth. Marcus was alive because mercy, wielded at the right moment, was more powerful than murder. His survival sent a message through the streets. Bumpy Johnson was not just a king who punished betrayal. He was a leader who understood that some lessons required forgiveness. Agent Patricia Hayes received a commendation for her work on the Sullivan case. The FBI credited her with infiltrating a complex corruption network and bringing down multiple dirty cops across 3 precincts. Her career soared. She never mentioned Bumpy Johnson's role in the investigation, because smart federal agents understood that some victories required unofficial partnerships. And Patricia Hayes was very smart. Commissioner Murphy used the Sullivan case to clean house throughout the NYPD. 12 officers were fired. 7 were arrested. The department's reputation improved overnight. Murphy became the most respected police commissioner in New York history. He sent Bumpy Johnson a bottle of expensive whiskey for Christmas. No card, no message. Just acknowledgement between 2 men who understood power. But the real winner in this intricate game was Elena Rodriguez. She had played her role perfectly, seducing Marcus while gathering intelligence for her uncle. Her reward was a full scholarship to law school at Columbia University. 5 years later, she became one of New York's most prominent civil rights attorneys. She never forgot the lesson Bumpy had taught her, that intelligence without purpose was worthless, but intelligence with vision could change the world. The story of Marcus Williams and Detective Sullivan became legend in Harlem. Not because of the betrayal, but because of how Bumpy Johnson had handled it. He had turned his enemies' moves against them. He had strengthened relationships with law enforcement. He had demonstrated mercy without showing weakness. Old-timers would tell the story in barbershops and corner stores for decades. How Bumpy Johnson had let a thief walk away because killing him would have been easy, but teaching him was valuable. How he had destroyed a corrupt cop not with bullets but with the man's own crimes. That's the difference between a gangster and a king, they would say. A gangster takes what he wants. A king makes people want to give it to him. Bumpy Johnson lived by a code that transcended the streets. Loyalty was everything, respect was earned. And intelligence without wisdom was just educated stupidity. He had proved that the most dangerous weapon in any war wasn't a gun or a knife. It was the ability to see 3 moves ahead while your enemies were still figuring out their first move. Marcus Williams had stolen money because he thought Bumpy wouldn't notice. Detective Sullivan had planned betrayal because he thought Bumpy couldn't outthink a college graduate. Elena Rodriguez had played her part because she believed in her uncle's vision. All of them had learned the same lesson. Bumpy Johnson didn't just survive in a world of betrayal and violence. He transformed it into a chessboard where every piece served his purposes. The $100,000 that Marcus had tried to steal. It was recovered and donated anonymously to 3 Harlem churches. The money built a community center, funded a scholarship program, and paid for medical care for elderly residents. Because true power wasn't about taking from your community. True power was about lifting your community while destroying those who threatened it. 20 years later, when Bumpy Johnson died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by family and friends, the story of Marcus Williams was mentioned in every obituary. not as a tale of betrayal punished, but as an example of wisdom applied. The lesson echoed through generations. In a world where everyone wants to be feared, the truly powerful choose when to show mercy. Because forgiveness, wielded correctly, creates more loyalty than 100 acts of revenge. That was the legend of Bumpy Johnson, the man who proved that the most sophisticated weapon in any arsenal was the ability to turn your enemy's intelligence against them, while teaching them that wisdom was worth more than any amount of stolen money. The streets of Harlem never forgot, and neither should you.